boy. Oh boy. Brothers, there's only one blood, cause it ain't no sense in us trampling on the stones. It's us, down to the bone. Blood is thick, waters were known well, cousins were kept apart, mothers were often memories. Fathers were not favorites on the farm, for he could do some harm, he could wreck the master scheme, for he, brothers, could dream.
Homeboy by Sonchi Ali. Welcome to this Coon Round Report. May the peace and blessings of the life-giving creative spirit be upon you and upon your family. My name is Melvin Ishmael Johnson, coming at you live from the Coon Round studio. This week on the Coon Round Report, I will have an in-depth conversation with Mary Louise Patterson, the daughter of Louise Thompson Patterson and William Patterson. Mary Louise Patterson is the co-author of the excellent book, Letters from Langston, about letters from poet Langston Hughes to her parents and close friends. Excellent book. It would be her father, William Patterson, and his close friend, Paul Robeson, who on December the 17th, 1951, would take the United States before the United Nations and accuse the U.S. of attempted genocide against the descendants of the child. Hey, Mary Louise, welcome to the Coon Round Report.
Thank you, thank you. How are you?
Oh, I'm just fine. Can you very briefly give us, give the audience just a little small sketch of your moms and your pops, your mother and your father?
Well, both of my parents, Melvin, were African-American communists at one time, members of the United States Communist Party, but they were lifetime Black radical activists. And they came to that activism, to that ideological activism, out of their childhood experiences and their young adult experiences with racism. They came to nationalism, and from nationalism to internationalism. This was at the turn of the century. This was during the Harlem Renaissance. This was the time of the Scottsboro trial. And they felt, both of them, that the Communist Party was not only talking about African-American liberation, but was also trying to do something about it. So they were attracted to the party and they joined. My mother later in the 50s kind of slipped away, excuse me. My father never did. He remained a communist until he died. They were based in the African-American community, both of them, and that's where we lived. That's where they did a lot of their work. My mother did a lot of different things, but she was the breadwinner for the family, and my father was the activist most of the time. You know, making no money, but you know, trying to secure African-American liberation, African-American freedom, and freedom also for workers, and they were also internationalists. So I hope that gives you some idea of who they were. They lived a long time. My mother was 98 years old when she died. My father was 88 when he died. He probably would have lived a lot longer, but it was the result of a complication from an operation that he had when he was 88 years of age. Mm-hmm. They were wonderful people. They loved people. They created a wonderful home for me to grow up in. Other children of communists were my friends, as well as friends that I had at school. But they built a family within the Communist Party and the African-American Liberation Movement that was the family that I grew up in.
Mm-hmm. And then, you know, I remember a few months ago, And I was amazed because the Martinville Seven, was in the news where they had finally pardoned the Martinville Seven who was executed. There was no mention of your father then, and I thought that was rare simply because your father was involved with just about all of your central cases that have been going on with the Scottsboro boys, the Trenton, the Martinville situation, and then the other thing that stuck in my mind is on December the 17th, I'm watching a program and they're talking about the petition, and I think it was somewhere in Minnesota, University of Minnesota, and then they mentioned, they kept saying that it was W.E.B. Du Bois who took the petition to France and Paul Roach in New York, but it was your father who took the petition to France and accused the United States of genocide against the descendants of the chattel slaves of America. And I thought that was remarkable. But I want to get just a little into the book, The Letters from Langston, because he was such a central figure also, not only in your life, but just in the life of the cultural aspect of America. Can you talk a little about the book and your co-writing?
I sure will. I just want to go back quickly to mention that my father in the 1950s headed an organization called the Civil Rights Congress, which came out of the National Negro Congress in the 1940s, the late 1940s. And this was an organization that defended African Americans who were accused, wrongfully accused, of course, like the Martinsville Seven, or like the Trenton Six, or like Rosalie McGee, or Rosa Ingram. They were wrongfully accused of either murdering a white person or fighting back against a white person. And the Civil Rights Congress took up those cases. Unfortunately, in the case of the Martinsville Seven, they did not win that case. And as you mentioned, those 7 African-American men were murdered in the electric chair. The same was true for the Trenton Six. That was a case that also was not won. But my father, courageously, valiantly, along with others who belonged to the Civil Rights Congress, fought for their release. It's also true for case out of Mississippi. I can't think of his name, but anyway, I just wanted to mention that.
Willie McGee.
Yeah, Willie McGee. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Willie McGee, which went on for a long time. Some of your readers may know. If they don't, I really suggest that they read about these cases where they may be able to read where they may be able to get a hold of my father's autobiography, The Man Who Cried Genocide. You mentioned the genocide petition that he presented to the United Nations in Paris, or attempted to, where Paul did it here in the United States. A petition charging the US government with genocide against the Negro, as we were called back then, the Negro people. And for which both Paul and my father paid a very high price. Paul's passport was taken, my father's passport was taken, Alpheus Hunton's passport was taken around that time, so was W.B. Du Bois. Dr. Du Bois's passport was taken. This was during the McCarthy period, tremendous political repression, and they did not receive their passports back until the late 1950s, 1959, 1960.
Mm-hmm. And then also touch on the fact that your father and your mother was involved with the Black Panthers, representing Huey P. Newton, and also Angela Davis.
Yeah.
Can you touch on that just a little?
Okay, well, my father was one of the mentors for the Panthers, and they would come to New York. The leadership, the Northern California leadership would often travel to New York to meet with my father. When Huey's trial was imminent, My father went to Charles Gary in San Francisco, a progressive white lawyer, and got Gary to represent Huey, which he did. And as you know, Huey got off. But that my father was one of the political, ideological mentors for the Panthers for a number of years. My mother and Angela Davis, the Free Angela Davis campaign, my mother went to England to start Free Angela Davis campaign organizations in England. And so she was in her 70s at the time. My father was probably in his 80s at the time. And so they were active their entire lives. And they also were mentors to many, up and coming civil rights, freedom activists who weren't members of the Communist Party, but who had a respect for them and the work that they had done their entire lives, and sought counsel from them. As far as the book is concerned, the book that Evelyn Louise and I wrote, as was played in that clip that you opened with, this is a book of correspondence, a 40-year correspondence between our two sets of parents and Langston. And the importance of the book, as I mentioned in the clip, is that it really does show that Langston never gave up on the ideas around a world of peace, but with justice, justice for working people, that they deserved a fair share of the fruits of their labor. Langston never gave up on those ideas. And but many of the books written about him seem to suggest or just outright say that Langston, sort of turned his back on those ideas. And a lot of them use his appearance before McCarthy in 1950, in the 1950s, was 1954, as a testament to that. He appeared before McCarthy. He did renounce some of the poems that he had written earlier, like Put One More S in the USA, and his ode to the Red Army and his ode to Leningrad. But Nebilu and I, Nebilu is my co-author, and unfortunately, Melvin, she just left us in November. This last year. We really felt that this was more a tactical retreat on Langston's part, because he never had an academic position. He never had a job at a publishing house. He made his entire life, his money, his income was made based on his work.
Yeah, and let me say this also.
And based on reading his work.
Yeah, a lot of people don't know he was also instrumental with your mom's and Langston Hughes started the Suitcase Theater company. That was very important. But here's what stick out in my mind: I'm trying to figure out why there is no. I think that you should be teaching a course. We got 114 historical Black schools out here. We got this book. You should be teaching a course there somewhere about this important information. I just want to say this. Also, before we let you go, a couple more things. I want you to touch on what I consider the early Black Lives Matter movement, started by outstanding Black females. Can you talk about the Sojourner group?
So as I mentioned, in 1951, McCarthy was railing against communists, what he called pinkos, fellow travelers. And there was really a climate of fear that was created in this country, that if you knew anybody that was had been in the Communist Party, or even was a neighbor to somebody who had been in the Communist Party, you were suspect, and you could lose your job, as many people did. You could lose your families. Families were torn asunder. People committed suicide. It was a horrible, horrible time. And not unlike the times under Trump, and his attempt to create this anti-Muslim, anti-Islamic, phobic atmosphere. And so W.B. Du Bois's, Dr. Du Bois's passport had been taken from him. He was accused of being an agent of a foreign government. He was on trial for that, and he was actually found innocent, but the government took his passport. And that was kind of like the last straw. My mother and Bea Richards, the actress Bea Richards, who was living with us at the time here in Harlem, they stayed up all night and they wrote this call to African-American women to form this organization, to form an organization that ultimately was named Sojourners for Truth and Justice. And they called upon women that they knew, and those women also called upon friends of theirs that Louise and Bea and Charlotta Bass didn't know. And Charlotta Bass, incidentally, was the editor and the publisher of the California Eagle newspaper, the Black newspaper in Los Angeles. And they put out this call, and they had a convention, and women came. They ultimately took a delegation, huge delegation of African-American women to Washington. They attempted to go into the Pentagon, the White House, and Congress. And they were petitioning for justice for African-American people and for respect for African-American women. And for the release of Dr. Du Bois, who was being held at the time, but also for the return of the passports of my father, the release of Alpheus Hunton, who was Du Bois's assistant. And they were wonderful. I mean, Angie Dickerson, they took one of those mechanical wind-up darky dolls down with them, and they wound that doll up and put it on the desk. This was, I think, at the Pentagon, and said, this is what you're sending around the world. This is the image of Black people that you're sending around the world, and this has to stop. They were quite incredible.
Okay. And if you could give us about 10 more minutes, whatever, because a couple of things I want to do real quick. I want to mention the possibility of trying to set up a chapter for the Sojourner group out here in Los Angeles, something we could talk about later on, because I think it's very important historical group.
Homeboy. Brothers, there's only one blood, cause it ain't no sense in us trampling on the stones. It's us, down to the bone. Blood is thick, waters were known well, cousins were kept apart, mothers were often memories. Fathers were not favorites on the farm, for he could do some harm, he could wreck the master's scheme, for he brothers could dream. Your mama ain't no saint, your daddy died in a shallow stream, but your uncle Dr. King did have a dream, my brother. And what is your real excuse? Why can't you study your lessons and stay in school? Why can't you study your lessons and stay in school? Free love and sex ain't nothing but a game. Don't never last, try hope. Take a chance on love, register to vote. Money ain't everything, but you could buy her a ring. Listen to little blackbird sing. Buy you a record of a yardbird with wings. Get into the swing of things, homeboy.